She kissed him before she told her boyfriend. She told herself she was going to. She told herself she needed the right words first. She told herself a lot of things. None of them were the real reason she was silent. The real reason was sitting across from her at a restaurant, covering her hand with his, trusting her completely. Some stories don't start with a lie. They start with a silence that is worse than any lie. Welcome to Romance HeartFlixTV that you're not going to recover from this one. When Amara Ose lands in Seoul on the scholarship of a lifetime, she falls for Shin Jae-won. Steady, intentional, the kind of man who shows up exactly when he says he will and means every word he says. But his brother, Shin Dae-won, is everything Jae-won is not. Cold on the surface, magnetic underneath, the kind of dangerous that doesn't announce itself until it's already too late. Amara came to Seoul to build something real, something hers. What she did not plan for was falling into something she couldn't design her way out of. If you love complicated love, impossible choices, and the kind of tension that follows you long after the story ends, like, subscribe, and stay until the last word because this story is only just beginning. Now, let's get into it. By the morning after, Amara had assembled a version of herself that could function. That was the only way to describe it. Assembled, the way you put together something you need to use before you've had time to properly fix it. She washed her face. She made coffee with a small kettle on her desk. She pulled on her coat and walked across campus in the thin October chill with her bag over one shoulder and her notebook already open in her hand, because moving was better than standing still, and standing still was the one thing she could not afford right now. She had been good at this since she was 16 years old, the management of things that could not yet be spoken. Growing up watching her mother handle everything alone had taught her early that feelings were not the enemy. The timing of feelings was, you felt what you felt, and then you put it somewhere safe until you had the space and the language to deal with it properly. That was the system. That was how Amara Ose had gotten herself from a 2-bedroom flat in Accra to a full scholarship at Yonsei University's architecture program, and she was not about to let the system fail her now. It held. It held all the way through her morning seminar, through the long reading session in the third-floor library alcove, right up until Shin Jae-won appeared at the end of her Tuesday urban design lecture with 2 cups of coffee from the cart near the west entrance, the way he always did, and smiled at her. Open, unhurried, entirely certain, and something in her chest cracked cleanly in half. "You look tired," he said, handing her the cup. "Late night," she said. "Research paper." He looked at her for a moment. Jae-won always looked at things carefully, without rush or performance. He had a quality of attention that most people had to work at, but that seemed to come naturally to him, like breathing, like patience. She held his gaze and kept her face composed, and felt the guilt settle into the crack in her chest with the quiet precision of something that had been waiting for exactly that opening. "Come eat with me," he said. "Properly. Not vending machine food. I have a seminar at 2. It's 11. We have time." She went. They sat across from each other in the small restaurant near the East Gate, the one that served the doenjang jjigae she had been ordering since her 3rd week in Seoul, back when she was still checking the menu carefully and now could recite it in her sleep. Jae-won ordered without looking at the menu because he already knew it, the way he knew most things. Quietly, ahead of time, without making a performance of the knowing. She watched him do it and thought, this is what is real. This is present and chosen and mine. And she believed it. She genuinely believed it. The guilt sat beside the belief, and neither of them moved for the other. He talked about his graduate thesis. He was in the final stretch, the assembly phase, he called it, where all the parts were in place and the argument was clear, and the only remaining task was the writing, which he described as the most demanding part because it required translating something he understood 3-dimensionally and instinctively into flat, sequential language that other people could follow. She listened. She asked questions. She was present, actually present, not performing it, because this was Jae-won, and being with him had always been genuinely easy, and that was the part that made everything else worse. The ease was not an act. That was what hurt. "You're quiet," he said, somewhere in the middle of the meal. "I'm listening." "You listen loudly. Normally you have 3 opinions about everything I say." She picked up her spoon. "I think the thesis sounds strong." He studied her across the table. "That's not an opinion. That's a summary." He set down his chopsticks. Amara. I'm fine, she said. Tired. The paper took more from me than I expected. He held her gaze for a moment. She did not flinch, and the guilt did not move. She told herself, not yet. She needed to understand what it was first. She needed to know its shape and its edges before she could hand it to someone else. She needed, above everything, to be sure of what she was saying before she broke something she was not sure could be fixed. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Rest tonight, he said. I'll come by tomorrow. She turned her hand under his and held it, and felt the warmth travel up through her the way it always did with him. Steadily, dependably, the way sunlight comes through a window, gentle and unhurried, and entirely without conditions. She thought, I do not deserve this right now. She thought, I am not going to lose this. Both thoughts lived in the crack in her chest and widened it slightly, and she said, tomorrow, and she meant it. She avoided day one for 9 days. This required a very specific and exhausting form of spatial management. She rerouted her paths through the architecture building. She adjusted the timing of her studio sessions, arriving earlier or staying later, whichever calculation produced the lowest likelihood of crossing him in the corridor. She used the far staircase. She chose the long route around the south courtyard even when it added 7 minutes, and the sky was the flat gray of approaching rain. She was aware of how much cognitive energy this consumed. She was also aware, with the unsentimental clarity that arrived when she finally stopped arguing with herself, that consuming this much energy was already an answer to the question she was pretending not to have asked. You do not redesign your entire daily geography around a person who means nothing. Kezia noticed on the 4th day. Kezia Mensah was Amara's closest friend at Yonsei, a Ghanaian postgraduate on a separate research fellowship, perpetually overcommit, perpetually cheerful, and in possession of the most accurate read on any situation that Amara had ever encountered in another human being. You went around the entire science building, Kezia said, falling into step beside her on the main walkway. That adds at least 6 minutes. I needed the air. It's raining. Lightly. Kezia looked at her with the expression she wore when she had decided not to push but wanted it officially noted that she was not fooled. Okay, she said. Just that. Nothing more. And the nothing more was its own kind of statement. It was on the 8th evening, sitting with Jaewon in the quiet of his apartment, the city low and steady outside the window, his sketchbook open across his lap and her Korean grammar workbook open across hers, that she asked him. She had not planned to. They had been in that particular piece that develops between two people who have learned to be still together without it needing to mean anything beyond itself. And then the guilt shifted in her chest. Moved, the way something moves when it has been still too long and the stillness itself becomes unbearable. And before she could organize it back into position, she heard herself say, quietly and without quite deciding to, what happened between you and Daewon? He did not look up immediately. His pencil stopped moving. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It had weight. It was being held carefully from the inside. Did someone say something to you? He asked. Not a question, an assessment. Kezia told me almost nothing. Just that you used to be close, and now you aren't. She paused. I'm asking you. He closed the sketchbook. He placed it on the table beside him and looked at his hands for a moment, the way he looked at everything, taking his time, deciding how much of himself to give. Then he looked at her, and he told her. He told her about their father first. The aneurysm at 53, sudden, without warning, on an ordinary Wednesday morning in April when Jaewon was 18 and Daewon was 16. He told her about the specific way grief had rerouted them both. Himself inward, building the controlled, methodical version that could keep functioning, keep producing, keep maintaining. Daewon outward. Harder, faster, louder, holding everything loosely because loosely was how things were held right before they were taken. He told her about their mother, who had been extraordinary in the way people are extraordinary when they have no other option. Then he told her about Park So-yeon. He had been with her for almost 2 years. She was someone he had chosen deliberately, the way he chose everything, slowly and with full attention, and only after he was certain. He did not fall easily, and he had fallen for her, and that was not a thing he said without weight behind it. Near the end, The relationship had been suffering. Jaewon had known it. He had not ended it, not because he was afraid, but because he was still trying, still deciding, still holding the weight of something and looking for a way through rather than a way out. He had not told Daewon any of this, because Jaewon did not speak about the things that were costing him the most. That was simply how he was built. Soyeon had known he had not ended it. She had gone to Daewon anyway. She had appeared at his door one evening and told him that it was over, that Jaewon had ended things 2 weeks prior, that she was no longer with anyone, that she was free. She had delivered it with a kind of specific, confident detail that leaves no room for doubt. Dates. Particulars. The unwavering certainty of someone who knows their lie will not be immediately verified, because the person it concerns does not speak about his private life. Daewon had had no reason not to believe her. He was 19 years old, and 3 years out from losing his father, and still carrying grief in the reckless, unexamined way of someone who had never been taught to set it down. He had not yet become the man he would eventually become. He acted without thinking, which was, in those years, something he was still capable of. They spent one night together. One night built entirely on a lie Soyeon had constructed so that someone else would do the thing she did not have the courage to do herself, and a relationship she wanted out of without having to face the man she was leaving. Afterward, something felt wrong. The details didn't sit right. Daewon called Jaewon the next morning on the pretense of something ordinary and listened carefully to how his brother spoke about Soyeon. Present tense. The quiet, specific language of someone still in something, still holding it, still trying. And he understood immediately and completely what had happened. He went to Jaewon that same day. He told him everything, not in softened pieces, not with caveats or careful framing, but plainly, in the order it happened, including his own part in it. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for understanding. He stood in the truth of it and said it out loud. Jaewon listened without interrupting. When Daewon finished, Jaewon stood in the silence of it for a long moment. Then he said, "I need you to leave." And Daewon had left. And neither of them had found their way back to that conversation in the 3 years since. "So, you know Soyeon lied to him," Amara said carefully. "I know," he said. "That doesn't make what he did right. But it changes the shape of it." He was quiet for a moment. "He came to me the same day and told me everything. He didn't have to. He could have said nothing, and I would never have known." His jaw tightened, barely perceptible. That part one have never been able to put down. A pause. Knowing and feeling are not the same country. She looked at him, the clean line of his jaw, the particular quality of his stillness, which she understood now as the stillness of a person managing something with the full force of everything they had. "What does it feel like?" she asked. He considered this for a long time. "Like confirmation," he said finally, "of something I had always suspected, but never wanted to prove true." A pause. When Daewon is in a room, the room orients toward him. Without his asking, without his trying, people move toward him the way things move toward gravity, naturally, inevitably, without anyone making a conscious choice. He looked toward the window. "It was like that even when we were children. And I spent a long time telling myself it didn't matter because he was my brother and I loved him, and those two things were enough. And then Soyeon happened. And I understood that I had been telling myself a story. And the story wasn't true. And I didn't know what to do with that." She sat very still. "It wasn't about Soyeon," he said. "Not really. It was about every room I had ever stood in where I felt the ground tilt slightly, away from me and toward him. Soyeon was just the one I couldn't explain away." He looked at her. His expression was open in a way she had rarely seen on him, and it was costing him, and she could see it costing him. "I don't blame him. I have never blamed him. But I have not known how to be in the same space as him since then without feeling it. That tilt. That particular tilt." Amara held what he had just given her and felt the full weight of it settle into her chest alongside everything else she was already carrying. She thought about Daewon. In the elevator on the 3rd floor. In the corridor outside the graduate studio. In the common room with rain on his jacket and that exact, composed expression that somehow landed differently than any expression she had seen on anyone else. She thought about the involuntary way her attention moved toward him whenever he entered a space, before she had made any decision about it, before she had chosen anything at all. She thought about the room tilting. She understood suddenly and completely why Jaewon could not fix this alone. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. "Tell him that," she said quietly. "Not the Soyeon part. The tilt part. Tell him you know it was never his fault and that knowing it wasn't enough. Tell him what it cost you, without making it about blame." Jaewon looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face, not resolution, but the early shape of something that could become resolution if it was handled with enough care and enough time. "You think that would help?" "I think it's the truth," she said. "And I think he deserves to hear it. And I think you deserve to have said it." He turned his hand under hers and held it the way she had held his across the restaurant table, firmly, quietly, the grip of someone who is not letting go. "You're very certain," he said. "I know what it costs to carry something alone," she said. "I watched my mother do it my whole childhood." He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth briefly against her knuckles. Not romantic, just present, just a gesture that said, "I hear you. I see you. I'm here." And she sat beside him in the quiet of his apartment and felt the full and terrible weight of loving someone she was in the process of failing. She did not tell him. She told herself she would. She told herself she needed to fix the brothers first, needed to make sure there was a path back to each other before she added another wound to the room. She told herself a great many things that evening, and most of them were partially true, and the rest was the architecture of someone building a shelter she already knew would not hold. Daewon did not come to class for the rest of that week, or the week after. She noticed his absence the way she had learned to notice his presence, with the specific and involuntary attention of a body that had developed its own tracking system without asking her permission. His seat in the graduate studio empty. His coffee cup not at the common station by the window. The third-floor corridor slightly easier to move through, because the particular charge in the air when he was nearby had gone out of it. She did not have his number. It had never been exchanged. Every encounter between them had happened in person, in shared spaces, in the accidental and deliberate geography of two people who moved through the same building without having chosen each other. She had no way to reach him except to go to his apartment. And going to his apartment was the one thing she had spent 2 weeks and an enormous reserve of cognitive energy not doing. But he had not been in class for nearly 2 weeks. She did not know if he was unwell, or if something had happened between him and Jaewon, or if her conversation that evening had somehow reached him and made things worse. She did not know anything, and not knowing had joined everything else in her chest and added to the weight of it. She needed to draw a line. She had needed to draw it since the night in his apartment, and she had been drawing it in the wrong direction, away from him, inward, in her own geography. The line needed to be drawn between them, named, stated clearly, the way clear things needed to be stated. She told herself this was why she went. She was not entirely wrong. She knocked on his door on a Thursday evening with her coat buttoned to the collar and her bag on her shoulder and her hand completely steady. Her speech was organized in her head, clear, kind, firm. She knew what she was going to say. She had prepared it the way she prepared everything that required her full attention, thoroughly, in order, with a beginning and a middle and an end. He opened the door. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately read. Not surprised. Not guarded. Not the flat, controlled surface she had grown accustomed to navigating. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, on his particular face, like a man who had been alone with something difficult for too long and was not entirely certain how to account for the relief of seeing another person. He was not put together the way he usually was. His hair was slightly disordered. He was in a plain gray crew neck rather than his usual structured coat. Behind him, the apartment was covered in architectural drawings, rolled and flat, pinned and loose, and several empty coffee cups sat on the windowsill, and the whole space had the organized chaos of someone who had been working with intensity and sleeping with minimalism. "You haven't been in class," she said. "I've been working. Thesis review is in 3 weeks. Are you all right?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Not quite an invitation. Just an opening. available to be accepted or declined. She stepped inside. The apartment was warm. It smelled the way it had the first time she had been here, something clean and specific, paper and cold air, and the careful stillness of a space organized by someone who knew exactly what they needed around them. She stood in the middle of it and did not sit down because sitting down was not part of the plan. "I came to say something," she said. He was at the kitchen counter filling a glass of water. He set it down and turned to face her with his arms crossed loosely, his expression attending. She started. She stopped. Started again. "What happened between us cannot happen again. I need you to know that." Not because it wasn't. Another stop. She had rehearsed this more smoothly than it was coming out. Not because it wasn't real, but because Jaewon is real. What I have with him is real. And I am not a person who does this. I need you to understand that I am not a person who does this. He was very still. "And I need you to fix things with him," she continued. "I asked Jaewon about what happened between you both. He told me." She held his gaze. "He told me about the tilt, Jaewon. He doesn't blame you. He has never blamed you. But he needs you to know what it cost him. And he doesn't know how to say it. And you need to go to him because whatever is happening." She stopped again. This time she let the stop stand, because what she had been about to say was whatever is happening between us, and she was not going to finish that sentence. "Your brother has been carrying this alone for 3 years. And it is enough." The room was very quiet. Daewon looked at her for a long time. His arms were still crossed, but something in the set of them had shifted. Not defensive. The posture of someone bracing from the inside. His jaw was set. His eyes were dark and completely steady on her face. "You came here to end something," he said quietly. "And to fix something." At the same time. "Yes." "You think those two things are compatible?" "I think they have to be." He was quiet. He looked at the floor. Then he looked back up at her, and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. More than the laughter in his kitchen weeks ago, more than the 2 seconds in the rain when his face had opened briefly before he closed it again. It was the expression of a man who has been offered something he does not feel he has the right to want, and is struggling with the wanting anyway. "Amara," he said. Just her name. Low and quiet, and without anything after it. She felt it move through her the way everything did with him, disproportionately, in the part of her that had stopped accepting instructions from her mind weeks ago. She held very still. "Say you'll go to him," she said. A long pause. "I'll go to him," he said. She nodded. She picked up her bag from where it had slipped to the floor. She turned toward the door. Her hand was on the handle. And then she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. She heard the specific mechanical sound of a lock being opened with a code, not a key, a code. The kind that is shared between people who trust each other enough to hand over the means of entry. The kind that is never changed, even after 3 years of silence, because changing it would mean admitting that the door is finally closed. She turned. Jaewon stood in the doorway. He was wearing his coat. His bag was still on his shoulder. His eyes moved from Daewon standing in the middle of the apartment with his arms no longer crossed, his face still carrying whatever it had been carrying a moment before, to the drawings covering every surface, to the bag in her hand, to her face. She watched the inventory happen in real time. She watched the picture assemble itself in his eyes. Not the picture of what this was, which was complicated and unfinished and full of context he did not have, but the picture of what it looked like. And she understood in the terrible clarity of that moment that what something looks like and what it is are two things that a closed apartment door cannot separate. His face went through something she had no word for. Not anger, not grief. The specific and terrible stillness of a person who has just had confirmed the thing they refused to let themselves believe was possible. The stillness of a wound that had enough warning to brace, but not enough to stop the arrival. He did not raise his voice. He did not move from the doorway. He walked to the table. Slowly, he set down his keys. Not thrown, not dropped. Placed with the careful, deliberate movement of a man managing himself with everything he had. Which was, she knew. She knew better than almost anyone. Everything. He looked at her. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. He looked at Daewon. Daewon was standing completely still, and his face was open and raw and entirely without armor. The controlled surface gone. The flat neutrality gone. Everything gone. He looked like a man watching himself repeat the worst moment of his life and unable to locate a single word that was anywhere near adequate. Jae-won looked at his keys on the table. He picked them up. He turned. He walked out. The door closed behind him. Not slammed, closed. The soft, final click of it landed in the room like the last note of something that had been playing for a very long time. Amara stood with her hand still on the handle. She sat down on the floor. Not on the couch. Not on a chair. On the floor, her back against the table leg, her bag beside her. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, Seoul continued, enormous and moving and completely indifferent. Daewon sat down on the other side of the room, his back against the couch. Neither of them spoke. She had come here with her speech prepared. With her coat buttoned and her hands steady and her intentions as clean as anything she had brought to this country. She had held Jae-won's hand and asked him to be brave enough to open a door he had kept closed for 3 years. And he had come because she asked him, because he trusted her, because he was the kind of person who, when the person he loved asked him to try, tried. The refrigerator hummed. She pressed her palm flat against the cold floor. Outside, the city moved through the night without her. Inside, the apartment held the weight of everything said and unsaid, and almost said and stopped short of said, and the particular silence of 2 people on opposite sides of a room that neither of them knew how to leave. That is where we leave part 1. 2 brothers. 1 woman. And a door that just clicked shut on everything she thought she had. If this story already has its hands around your chest, you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Romance HeartFlixTV, and drop a comment below. What moment got you first? We want to know. Part 2 is coming, and it does not let up. See you there. She did not know how long she sat on that floor. Long enough for the city outside to go fully quiet. Long enough for the cold to find its way through her coat and settle into the spaces between her bones. Daewon had not moved either. He was still on the other side of the room, back against the couch, knees bent, looking at nothing in particular with the focused emptiness of someone whose thoughts were very loud and very far away. Neither of them had spoken since the door clicked shut. Eventually she stood. She picked up her bag. She straightened her coat. She looked at him once, just once, and his face was still open in that raw, unguarded way, the armor entirely gone, and she could not hold the look for long because it felt like standing too close to something still on fire. "I'm going," she said. He nodded. He did not try to stop her. She let herself out. The walk back to the dormitory was the longest of her life and also completely unremarkable. Just her and the empty campus paths and the November cold and the sound of her own footsteps on stone. She let herself into her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the wall across from her. The wall did not offer anything useful. She had not expected it to. She did not sleep. In the morning, she texted Jae-won. Just his name, no explanation, no apology, not yet. The apology deserved more than a text message, more than a screen between them. Just his name, like a knock, like asking whether the door was still there. He did not reply. She waited an hour and texted again. "Can we talk, please?" Nothing. She went to his apartment at noon. She knocked 3 times and stood in the corridor and listened. The apartment was silent in the specific way that places are silent when someone is inside them and choosing not to answer, which is entirely different from the silence of an empty room. She pressed her forehead lightly against the door. "Jae-won," she said, quiet enough to be private, loud enough if he was standing right on the other side. The silence continued. She left. Kezia knew something was wrong by afternoon. Amara had not said a single word about it. She had gone to her 2 o'clock seminar, taken notes, come back to the dormitory, made tea she did not drink. Kezia had watched all of this from the doorway of her room with the expression of someone assembling a complete picture from pieces she was not officially supposed to have. "Do you want to talk about it?" Kezia asked. "No." "Do you want me to sit here and not talk about it?" Amara looked at her. "That one." "Yes." Kezia came in without another word. She sat on the floor against the side of the bed, and Amara sat beside her, and together they looked at the window and the gray city moving beyond it, and Kezia did not ask a single question for 2 full hours. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for Amara in days. Jae-won replied on the second day. One line. I need some time. She read it 4 times. She typed and deleted 6 different responses. She settled on okay and placed her phone face down on the desk. Okay. As if time were something she could give him without it costing her. As if she were not sitting in her room carrying the specific guilt of someone who had not been caught doing something, but who had done it and knew it and had to live inside that knowledge without anywhere to put it down. She opened her laptop. She worked on her coursework until 2 in the morning. She slept. She woke and did it again. This was how she managed. It had always been how she managed, through the work, through the structure, through the discipline of filling every available hour until the feeling had nowhere left to sit. On the 4th day, she saw Daewon. Not intentionally. She was coming out of the main library with her arms full of reference books, and he was on the path ahead of her, heading toward the east building. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. They both stopped. The path between them was empty. The morning was gray and cold, and there was nothing either of them could say that would be the right thing, and they both knew it. He looked at her carefully, reading her face the way he always did, assessing, taking inventory. Have you heard from him? He asked. He said he needs time. Daewon nodded slowly. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. I'm going to him. Today. His voice was flat, not cold, just decided. What happened with Soyeon? What I should have said 3 years ago. He deserves the conversation he never let me finish. He adjusted the strap of his bag. He walked out. He always walked out. But that doesn't mean I stopped having something to say. She looked at him for a long moment. The set of his jaw, the steadiness of his eyes. No self-pity. No hesitation. Just a man walking toward the hardest thing because walking away from it was no longer an option he was willing to take. Okay, she said. He nodded once and walked past her without looking back. She stood on the path with her arms full of books and watched him go and thought, this is who he is. Not the cold surface or the controlled distance he showed the world. This, a man who tells the truth even when it costs him everything, who walks toward the people he has hurt instead of away from them, who carries his own weight without asking anyone else to hold it for him. She turned and went back into the library. She sat at a table and read the same paragraph 7 times without absorbing a single word. Jae-won texted 3 days later. Tomorrow. The bench near the south fountain. 10. She replied. I'll be there. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark and did not rehearse anything because she had learned by now that rehearsing was useless. The right words never arrived on schedule. She would say what she said, and it would be imperfect and insufficient and true, and she would have to live inside whatever came after. There was no architecture for this. Some things could not be designed in advance. She was at the bench at 9:57. He arrived at 10 exactly. He sat beside her, and he had not brought coffee, and the absence of it said everything the way only a missing thing can say something. His face was the carefully neutral face she had first seen across the studio pairing announcement in week 1, controlled, present, revealing nothing until he chose to reveal it. They sat in silence for a moment. Tell me, he said. So she told him. All of it. She did not spare herself. She did not frame it generously or arrange it in a more forgivable order. She told it plainly, without performance, in the correct sequence of how it had actually happened. When she finished, Jae-won was quiet for a long time. She waited. She had learned not to fill his silences. Were you going to tell me? He asked finally. Before I walked in. She considered lying. Not for long. I wanted to, she said. I kept waiting until I had the right words. She paused. That was a mistake. There are no right words for this. I should have just said it. He looked at the fountain. His jaw was set. The night you asked me about Daewon, he said slowly. About Soyeon. The tilt. He stopped. You had already kissed him. Not a question. But she answered anyway. Yes. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before it. The kind with weight, because something specific has just been confirmed. He nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded at things he was putting somewhere deep. Jaewon. I'm not angry, he said. His voice was measured, almost careful. I want to be. I think I should be. But mostly I just feel like I should have seen it. Like there was something I missed. Something I wasn't giving you.
No.
She said it firmly. Don't do that. This is not about what you weren't giving me. You gave me everything. This is about something in me that I don't fully understand yet. He looked at her then, fully, directly, with the most open expression she had ever seen on his face outside of the night he told her about losing his father. It cost him the same way. I know it wasn't about what I gave you, he said quietly. But knowing it and feeling it are not the same country. She recognized the words. She had heard him say them before, about Daewon, about Soyeon, about the years of carrying something that understanding alone could not dissolve. And now she was the thing he was applying them to. The recognition of that settled in her chest like an answer to a question she had never wanted to ask. I know, she said. They sat a while longer. The campus moved around them. The fountain caught the flat winter light. A group of students crossed the far path with their heads down against the cold. The world continued, indifferently, the way it always did. Eventually he stood. I need more time, he said. Okay. He looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with coldness, but with the expression of a person grieving something not yet fully gone and trying to be precise about the grieving. Then he walked away across the campus, and she watched him go until the path curved and the trees took him, and then she was alone on the bench. She put her hands in her pockets and sat with the full shape of what she had done. Not around it, not beside it. In it. This is the thing I did. This is the shape of it. Now I carry it until I understand what carrying it means. She sat there for a long time. Then she got up and went to class. The more days passed, the more she understood that time alone was not going to fix this. She had told herself it might. She had told herself that Jaewon was someone who processed things carefully, and that careful processing took time, and that the silence between them was not an ending but a pause, the kind of pause that comes before something being said properly rather than something being abandoned. She had told herself this for 2 weeks with the specific discipline of someone who has decided to believe something regardless of the evidence accumulating on the other side. Then he texted her.
Can you meet me?
Same bench. 4 o'clock. She was there at 3:50. He arrived at 4 exactly. Same coat. Hands in his pockets. Controlled face, except not quite the same as before. There was something different in the quality of his stillness today. Not the stillness of someone managing themselves at great effort. The stillness of someone who had already finished managing, who had arrived at the other side of it and was standing there clearly, without drama. She knew before he sat down. He sat. He looked at the fountain for a moment. Then he looked at her. I've been thinking, he said. I know. I don't think I can do this. He said it quietly, without accusation, without spectacle. Just a plain sentence placed between them like something he had carried a very long way and was finally setting down. Not because I don't, he stopped. Started again. Not because what we had wasn't real.
It was.
You were real. A pause. But I've been here before. Not with you. With this feeling. The feeling of being the person who loved someone while something else was pulling them somewhere I couldn't follow. She did not say anything. Some things needed to be said all the way through without interruption. I healed from it the first time, he said. Barely. And it took longer than anyone knew, because I didn't talk about it. He looked at his hands. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to spend another year being careful with myself, because I didn't protect myself when I should have. The fountain ran quietly beside them. The sky was the flat, exhausted white of late November, the kind of sky that looked like the world had simply run out of color. I understand, she said. He looked at her. Do you? Yes. She meant it entirely. You're not punishing me. You're protecting yourself. Those are different things. Something moved through his face, a small, painful shift. The expression of a person who has been seen accurately at a moment when being seen costs something. I don't hate you, he said. I don't even blame you entirely. He looked back at the fountain. I've thought about this a lot. About day one, and the way a room tilts. About the fact that I chose to fall in love with someone and then introduced her to the very thing I've spent my whole life standing slightly outside of. He exhaled slowly. I'm not saying it's my fault. I'm saying it's more complicated than fault. She sat with that for a moment. It was the most generous and the most devastating thing he could have said, and she knew he knew it. What did Daewon say? She asked. When he came to you. Jaewon was quiet for a moment. He said everything he should have said 3 years ago. All of it, plainly. A pause. It didn't fix anything, but it was honest. More honest than anything we had managed between us in 3 years. He looked at her sideways. He told me he'd been trying to stay away from you, that he had been trying since the first time he noticed you, and that staying away had not worked. She looked at her hands. I'm not telling you that to hurt you, Jaewon said. I'm telling you because I think you should know that he was not careless about this. Whatever it was, whatever it is, it was not carelessness. She nodded. The weight in her chest had shifted. Not heavier, just different. Less like guilt and more like grief. The specific grief of losing something that was genuinely good because of something you genuinely could not control. And the particular helplessness of knowing that both of those things were simultaneously true. Jaewon. She turned to look at him. You deserved better than this.
From me.
From all of it. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way he nodded at things that were true and painful and required no response beyond acknowledgement. He stood. Take care of yourself, he said. Not coldly. The way you say something when you mean it completely and are saying it for the last time. She watched him walk away across the campus until the path curved and the bare trees took him. Then she sat alone on the bench for a very long time and let herself feel the full size of what was gone. She did not manage it into something smaller. She did not file it into columns. She just felt it, the whole shape of it, until her face was cold and the campus had emptied around her and the fountain kept running anyway. December arrived the way endings arrive. Not dramatically. Just inevitably. The semester wound down around her with the specific momentum of something that has been in motion for a long time and is finally approaching its natural stop. Amara buried herself in her final project submission. It was due in 3 weeks, and she poured herself into it with the focused, almost ferocious attention of someone who has decided that the work is the thing that will hold her together when everything else cannot. She was in the studio every day, sometimes until the building closed. She ate at her desk. She drank too much coffee and slept too little and filled every quiet hour with drawings and calculations and the particular discipline of a woman who had gotten herself this far by refusing to let feeling be the loudest thing in the room. Kezia came by every evening anyway. She showed up with food from the convenience store down the road, tteokbokki, kimbap, whatever the situation called for, and sat with Amara without requiring anything in return. You don't have to keep doing this, Amara said one evening, not looking up from her drafting table. I know, Kezia said, opening a container and setting it beside the drawings. I'm fine. Kezia handed her a pair of chopsticks and said nothing. Kezia. I am. Kezia looked at her with the patient, undeceived directness that was entirely her own. You don't have to be fine. You're allowed to be a complete mess. That's what this was, a complete, complicated, human mess. You're not a bad person. You just had terrible timing and a heart that didn't ask your permission before making decisions. Amara stared at the food in front of her. Something in her chest loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. I hurt him, she said. You did, Kezia said simply, without softening it and without cruelty. And meaning to and doing it anyway are two different things. Not meaning to and doing it anyway is just human.
It doesn't make it okay.
It makes it survivable. Amara ate her tteokbokki. Kezia ate hers. The dormitory was quiet around them and outside Seoul hummed its low, continuous hum, and Amara thought, I am going to be okay. Not today. Not this week. But eventually. She decided to believe it. She sat with the decision and held it gently, like something she was not yet sure of, but was choosing anyway. She did not see Daewon. This was partly circumstance, and partly something else she did not examine too closely. The semester was nearly over. He had retreated to the graduate research lab in the East Wing almost entirely, and their paths no longer crossed naturally. She told herself this was fine. She told herself she needed the distance. She told herself a great many things, most of which were true enough to function as truth. Once, crossing through the library annex, she saw him through the glass wall of a study room, alone at a long table, architectural drawings spread around him, his head bent over a detail he was working through. He had not seen her. She stood for a moment outside the glass and looked at the careful way his hand moved across the page, the slight crease between his brows that meant he was somewhere else entirely, deep in the problem. Then she kept walking. It was a Wednesday when Kezia appeared at her dormitory door holding a stack of pale yellow paper and wearing the expression of someone about to ask a favor they already know is inconvenient. "Student council elections," she said. "I'm on the distribution committee. We need to hand-deliver voting forms to every occupied room in the East Residential Wing. I have 52 rooms and 2 hours, and I absolutely cannot do this alone." Amara looked at her. That wasn't phrased as a question. It was framed as a request, Kezia said. "The spirit is a requirement." Amara put on her coat. They worked through the East Wing systematically, Kezia on one side of each corridor, Amara on the other. Knock. Hand over.
Move on.
Most people answered. A few didn't. Amara slid pale yellow forms under quiet doors and kept moving. It was the kind of task that required just enough attention to stop you thinking about anything else, and that was exactly what she needed. She fell into the rhythm of it.
Knock.
Hand over. Move on. They were on the 3rd floor, halfway down the corridor. Kezia took the left side. Amara took the right. She was at room 308 when she knocked. The door opened, and it was Oh Jisoo from her structural systems seminar, 2nd year. Always arrived early, and took notes with 3 different colored pens. "Oh, hey, student council elections, just dropping off a voting form." "Perfect. Thank you." Jisoo was already reaching for it, and the conversation was easy and brief the way these things were, and Amara was extending the form across the threshold when movement in the background snagged her attention. Jae-won walked into the room from the back, pulling on his shirt. He was looking down, focused on the buttons, unhurried. Completely unaware. Amara went very still. For one full second, she had the entire picture, his shirt half-buttoned, Jisoo's room, his coat on the chair behind her. Then he glanced up. The way people glance up when something has changed in a room without a sound. And his eyes went directly to the door.
He saw her. She saw him.
1 second. Maybe 2. Jisoo was still talking. Something about the deadline. Something about the candidates. Entirely unaware, her hand already closing around the form. Jae-won looked away first. Back to his shirt. Back to whatever he had been doing. As if the glance had meant nothing. As if Amara were simply a person standing at a door that happened to be open. Amara kept her face exactly where it was. "Great," she said to Jisoo. "Bright and easy and entirely normal. Enjoy the vote." She turned and walked before Jisoo had finished saying thank you. Faster than was natural. She passed Kezia, who had turned from the door across the hall and whose mouth had opened slightly, and Amara did not stop, did not look back, pushed through the stairwell door, and went down the first flight. And then she stopped walking because her eyes had filled without warning, and she could not see the steps properly. She sat down on the cold concrete of the landing. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She had known. She had told herself she knew. He would move on. She had said those words herself, plainly, without bitterness, 2 weeks ago outside the library. She had assembled herself around that fact and decided it was survivable. And mostly she had believed that. But knowing a thing and seeing it are not the same country. She had heard that sentence before, in Jae-won's own voice, applied to things that had hurt him. She understood it now from the inside. The way knowledge sits calmly in the mind and the body ignores it entirely and responds to what is real and present and in front of it. She sat on the landing, and the tears came quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the specific and unstoppable tears of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for weeks and has just had it placed directly in front of them, close enough to touch. She let them come. She did not manage them into something smaller. The stairwell door above her opened. Kezia sat down beside her on the step without a word. She did not ask questions. She did not offer perspective. She did not say anything at all. She just sat there, shoulder to shoulder on the cold concrete, and let Amara cry. After a while, Amara wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm okay," she said. "I know," Kezia said. They sat for another minute. The stairwell was cold and fluorescent and entirely unglamorous. Amara thought, this is what it actually looks like. Not a bench by a fountain. Not a rooftop or a rainy corridor. Just a stairwell and a stack of pale yellow voting forms and your best friend sitting on concrete beside you while you cry about a man who is never yours to lose. She stood up. She picked up her folder. "How many doors left?" she asked. Kezia checked her stack. 14. "Let's finish," Amara said. And they did. December moved fast. The semester took on that end-of-term energy, everyone tired, everyone pushing, the campus running on coffee and deadlines, and the collective understanding that there were only a few weeks left before everything reset. Amara buried herself in her final submission. She was in the studio early and out late, and the work was genuinely good, the kind of good that comes out when you have nothing left to protect, and you just put everything directly onto the page. She stopped rerouting her paths. Not because she had resolved anything, but because the energy required to manage her own geography had become more exhausting than whatever she had been trying to avoid. She needed that energy for other things. So she walked the direct routes. She used the third-floor corridor. She went to the common station for coffee in the mornings, and slowly the architecture building stopped feeling like a minefield and started feeling like a building again. She did not see Day One. Their schedules no longer overlapped naturally. She heard his name occasionally. Professor Yoon mentioned his thesis progress in a seminar review. Kezia spotted him in the library once, but she did not see him herself, and she had stopped deciding whether that was a relief. She called her mother more than usual. Tuesday evenings. Thursday mornings. Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon when the studio felt too quiet and the silence had the wrong texture. Her mother answered every time as if she had been waiting by the phone for exactly this call. Amara didn't tell her everything. She told her about the project, the deadline, the cold, the way Seoul looked in December with the lights strung along the main boulevard. Her mother told her about the garden, about the neighbor's dog, about the mango tree in the back that had finally, after 3 years of stubbornness, produced fruit. That tree should have been done in August, Amara said. And yet, her mother said. Amara looked at the ceiling of the studio and felt something in her chest loosen. Not everything, but enough. Mama, she said. I know, her mother said, without the details, without being told, just the unconditional, unearned I know of a woman who had been paying close attention for 23 years. I'm okay, Amara said. I know that too, her mother said. She submitted her final project on a Thursday night at 11:59, 1 minute before the deadline. Kezia called it reckless. Amara called it efficient. Both were right. She closed her laptop and looked at the studio ceiling and felt the specific, hollow quiet of finishing something large. Not sad. Not happy. Just empty in the particular way you are empty when you have been very full for a very long time, and suddenly there is room. Done, Kezia said, raising her coffee cup from across the table. Done, Amara said, raising hers. To surviving the semester, Kezia said. To surviving, Amara said. They sat in the empty studio for another hour after that, not working, just existing in the space. Amara looked at the pinboard where she and Jaewon's early concept sketches had once been pinned side by side, and saw only clean cork. Nothing left. The whole semester compressed into something finished. She let herself feel the full shape of it, what it had been, what it had meant, the Tuesday coffees and the careful conversations and the honest, unhurried way he had loved her. Then she let it go. Not completely, not forever. But enough to stand up, put on her coat, walk out into the cold December night, and feel, underneath everything, the quiet sense of something finished making room for something that had not yet started. It was Professor Yoon who gave her the reason. End of semester administrative work. The collaborative elective required a signed completion form from every participating student, including postgraduate students.
Most had already submitted theirs.
Daewon had not. His copy was sitting in a folder on Professor Yoon's desk, and she needed it signed and returned before the department closed for winter break. He is working from the Urban Planning Research Lab in the North Building, Professor Yoon said, handing Amara the folder with the efficiency of someone who had already decided who was delivering it. Second floor. You pass it on your way to the residential block. It's not a detour. It was not a question. Amara took the folder. She stood in the corridor after Professor Yoon's door closed and looked at it in her hands. A completion form. 3 pages, entirely administrative. There was nothing in it that required her specifically to deliver it. She could have left it at the department front desk and been done in 4 minutes. She walked to the North Building. The Urban Planning Research Lab was on the 2nd floor. A part of campus she had passed many times and never entered. It had a different atmosphere from the main studios, quieter, more self-contained, the stillness of people working on long problems rather than approaching deadlines. She almost turned back twice on the way there. She did not turn back. The lab was at the end of the corridor. Large windows on 2 sides. Long tables covered in the serious, ongoing work of people deep in something. The door was open. She knocked on the frame. Daewon looked up. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He looked the way he always looked, contained, steady, the surface in place. But she had spent enough time reading underneath it to catch the small adjustment when he registered it was her. Not surprise. Something smaller. Something that might have been, on a less guarded face, relief. Professor Yoon asked me to drop this off, she said, holding out the folder. He looked at it, then at her. You could have left it at the front desk. I could have, she said. He held her gaze. Then he nodded toward the chair at the end of his table. Sit down. She sat. How are you, he said. Not as a formality. An actual question, delivered with the full weight of someone who wanted an actual answer. Better than I was, she said. Not all the way yet. He nodded. The submission, Thursday night, 1 minute before the deadline. The corner of her mouth moved. Efficient. That's what I said, she said, and then stopped, because she realized she had said it the same way he might have, and the recognition of it sat warmly and strangely in the room between them. A small silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind with a current running through it, but not an unpleasant one. Are you okay? She asked. He considered it seriously, the way he considered things that deserved it. I've been better, he said. I've also been worse. A pause. I went to see Jaewon. I know, he told me. Something moved through his expression. How did he seem? Like himself. Controlled, honest, kinder than he needed to be.
She paused.
He said what you told him mattered. Not in those words, but I could hear it. Daewon was quiet.
We're not fixed, he said. He and I.
But we're something. Something that wasn't there before. That's enough for now, she said. That's actually a lot. He looked at her. The room was very still. Amara, he said. I know, she said. I don't know what this is.
I don't know what it's supposed to be.
Pretending I know would be the wrong thing. Yes, she said. So, I'm not going to pretend. Okay. He looked at her for a long time, the full, unmodified attention she had first encountered across a common room table and never entirely recovered from. She looked back and did not look away and did not tell herself a single managing thing. She just looked at him. He picked up the folder. He signed the form. He slid it back across the table without a word. She almost smiled. She took it.
She stood.
She put on her coat. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. I'll see you around, she said. Yes, he said, simply, quietly, as if it were already decided. As if it had already been decided for quite some time. She walked out into the corridor, and she was smiling. Small, private, entirely her own. The hallway was cold and fluorescent and completely unglamorous, and she did not mind at all. Winter break arrived the way rest arrives after a very long effort, not gently, not dramatically, just suddenly and completely, like a door closing on a room full of noise. Amara spent the first week of it sleeping. Not dramatically. Just the deep, recovering sleep of someone who had been running on tension for so long that the absence of it felt like being sedated. She slept 9 hours a night and woke slowly and lay still for a while before deciding what to do with the day, which was a luxury she had not allowed herself since September. She took long walks through the parts of Seoul she had not had time for during the semester, the quieter streets behind Gyeongbokgung, the narrow alleys in Bukshan, the long stretch of Mapo Boulevard in the early morning when the city was still deciding to be awake. She ate at the Pojangmaka near the South Gate and called her mother and did not think about anything she did not want to think about. Kezia went home to Accra for the holidays. The dormitory emptied out around her, students trickling away with luggage and early morning departure energy until the corridors that had hummed with the density of the semester were suddenly just corridors, wide and still and without urgency. Amara found she did not mind the quiet. She had spent so many months filling silence that the silence itself felt like a gift she had not known to ask for. She walked to Cheonggyecheon one afternoon, alone, with her hands deep in her coat pockets and her breath making small clouds in the cold air. The stream ran below street level, lit from underneath, the water catching the light and turning it into something luminous and quiet. Couples walked on both sides of the bank the way they always did, unhurried, and the city rose up on either side, and everything was exactly as it had always been, and she was different inside of it. She stood on the bank for a while. She thought about Jae-won. Warmly, the way you think about something that cost you something and that you do not regret the way you expected you would. She hoped he was okay. She thought he probably was. He was the kind of person who knew how to find his way back to himself, methodical, patient, entirely capable of the long and unglamorous work of healing. She hoped Jisoo was kind to him. She genuinely hoped that. She thought about Chicago, about the scholarship ending in June, about the graduate program applications she had been quietly drafting since October, 2 in Chicago and 1 in London and 1, almost involuntarily, added at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when she had been tired and not fully in control of her own decisions, in Seoul. She had not removed it from the list. She had looked at it several times and not removed it, which was itself a kind of answer she was not yet ready to say out loud. She left it there. The new semester started on a Monday. The campus filled back in over the weekend before, students returning with luggage and renewed energy and the collective, slightly fragile optimism of a fresh start, which was different from the energy of an ending. Lighter, more open. The architecture building lights came on at all hours again. The common station ran out of coffee by 9 o'clock. The studios filled with the sound of people beginning things. Amara had 2 electives, her final Korean language module, and a research seminar that would occupy most of her remaining time in Seoul. She had also begun drafting her graduate applications in earnest, sharpening statements of purpose, requesting references, working through the particular discipline of presenting yourself on paper with enough confidence to be compelling and enough honesty to be believed. The Seoul application sat in her drafts folder. She had written the statement of purpose 3 times and not submitted any of the versions. She left it there. She was crossing the East Courtyard on the first Wednesday of the new semester, bag over one shoulder, coffee already cold because she had forgotten about it while reading, when she heard footsteps behind her and knew them before she turned around. She turned around anyway. Daewon fell into step beside her. Hands in pockets. The particular unhurried energy of someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. He did not announce himself. He did not explain why he was walking in her direction. He simply appeared beside her the way weather appears, without asking permission and without requiring a response. "You stayed for the break," he said. "Most of it," she said. "You. Thesis work. The thesis does not observe holidays." She looked at him sideways. "That sounds like something you chose." The corner of his mouth moved.
Just barely.
It was productive. They walked across the courtyard together, and it was easy in a way that surprised her, not the charged, careful ease of before, when every shared space had required a kind of internal management she had grown exhausted by. This was something simpler. 2 people walking in the same direction in the January cold with the campus new around them and no particular performance required of either of them. "How is it going?" she asked. "The thesis." "Better than it was in November." "I can see the end of it now." The the shape of how it finishes. That's a good feeling.
Yes, he said.
He looked at her. How are the applications going? She stopped walking. He stopped too. He looked at her with the expression that meant he already knew something and was asking anyway, because he thought she should say it out loud. She started walking again. They're going. I have two I feel good about.
One I'm still working on.
And one I added late at night and haven't decided what to do with. He was quiet for a moment. Where is the last one? She looked straight ahead. Seoul. He said nothing, but she felt the quality of his silence shift. The way it acquired a texture when something had landed and he was deciding what to do with it. She did not look at him. She watched the path ahead and let the silence be exactly what it was. They reached the fork where the north building path split from the main campus walkway. He stopped.
She stopped. Coffee, he said.
Not a question. Just the word placed between them simply. The way he placed things, without pressure, without performance. Available to be picked up or left. She looked at him. The familiar set of his jaw. The steadiness of his eyes. The absolute absence of anything requiring her to manage her response to him. Okay, she said.
It started like that.
Coffee on Wednesday mornings, which became coffee on Wednesday and Friday mornings, which became the kind of thing that did not need to be scheduled because it was simply understood. He would appear at the fork in the east courtyard path, and she would be there, and they would walk to the small cafe near the north gate, the one that neither of them had discovered together but that both of them had already known about, which Kezia said was practically cosmic when Amara told her, and which Amara said was just a popular cafe, and both of them were right. They talked. About his thesis and her research seminar, about the applications and the city, and the things that came up naturally between two people who had been paying close attention to each other for longer than either of them had officially acknowledged. He asked questions the way he always had, directly, without cushioning, expecting real answers and prepared to give them back. She gave them. He gave them back. And the exchange of it had a quality she had not experienced in many conversations, the feeling of being genuinely received, not just heard. He did not rush anything. That was the thing she noticed first. The thing that surprised her most, given the intensity of everything that had come before, given the specific and consuming nature of what it felt like to be in the same room as Shin Dae-won, under any circumstances. He was not in a hurry.
He was not trying to arrive at something.
He seemed entirely content to be in whatever this was, present and unhurried, and entirely himself, without pushing the shape of it into something defined before it was ready. The effect of that on her was more disarming than anything else he could have done. More disarming than directness, more disarming than intensity. The patience was the thing that undid her. Kezia noticed the shift first. Of course she did. You're different, Kezia said one evening, looking at Amara over their convenience store ramen with the expression of someone running a careful assessment. I'm the same, you're lighter. Amara considered this honestly. The semester ended. The last semester ending did not make you lighter, Kezia said. That one made you cry in a stairwell. Amara had nothing to say to that. Kezia smiled into her ramen. I'm not asking. I'm observing. You're always just observing. It is my primary function, Kezia said, and the phrasing was so close to something Dae-won had said to her once, in a different context, on a different day, that Amara smiled at the table and did not explain why. Kezia noticed that too and chose, with tremendous grace, to say nothing about it. It was a Thursday evening in late January when it became something else. They had been in the research lab. She had stayed to use the large reference table after her seminar ran over, and he had been working on the final chapters of his thesis, and they had been in the same room for nearly 2 hours in the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill the space between them. She was packing up her things when he looked up from his drawings. Walk with me, he said. They walked through the campus in the dark, which was its own version of Seoul entirely. The paths lit amber, the buildings glowing warm from the inside, the air cold and sharp and entirely clean. They ended up on the rooftop of the north building, accessed through a door he had the code for, and she did not, which opened onto a flat concrete platform with a low metal railing, and the entire north face of the city spread below them in every direction. She looked at it. The Han River was a dark ribbon between bridges, reflecting the lights of the city in long gold lines. The buildings stacked and layered the way she had first noticed them from the bus on her very first night in Seoul, like someone had built a new world directly on top of the old one, and neither had agreed to give way. "You've been here before," she said. "The Research Institute has rooftop access," he said. He came to stand beside her at the railing, close, but not touching, looking at the city the way he looked at things he had decided to show someone, with a slight change in his expression that meant he was watching her see it for the first time and finding something in that. The city below them was enormous and luminous, and entirely itself. "I brought you here to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "I want to know what you actually want." He kept his eyes on the city for a moment, then turned to look at her directly. "Not what you think is right. Not what you think you should want. What you actually want." The railing was cold under her hands. Below them, Seoul hummed its low and continuous hum, the sound of a city that never fully went to sleep, that always had somewhere to be, that did not wait for anyone to make up their mind. "I want to finish this scholarship well," she said. "I want to get into a good program. I want to call my mother more than I do." She paused. "And I want—" She stopped. He waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting, the particular patience of someone who understood that some things could not be rushed out of a person, that they had to arrive in their own time and their own order. "I want to stop managing what I feel about you," she said. "I'm tired of it. I've been managing it since the common room, since the very first time you sat across from me and looked at me like that, and it has never once worked. Not for a single day. And I am tired." He turned to face her fully then.
"Then stop," he said. "Just like that."
Quietly, without drama, without making a ceremony of it. "Just stop. Just like that. Just like that." She looked at him, at the city behind him and the amber light coming up from below and the cold and the specific, steady way he looked at her, like someone who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, without hesitation, without calculation, just the warm, certain grip of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, and had not rushed it, and had not reached for it before she was ready, and was now holding it as if it were the most natural thing. Which she thought it was. It had always been. They stood at the railing with the city below them and their hands between them and Seoul enormous and indifferent all around. And neither of them said anything else for a long time. They did not need to. Some things did not require language. Some things were already completely said.
He was not gentle about it.
Not in the way he reached for her hand in public. Automatic, unhesitating, as if it had always been his, and he had simply stopped pretending otherwise. Not in the way he appeared at the end of her Thursday seminar without being asked, leaning against the wall outside with the particular stillness of someone who had nowhere else to be, because this was where he had decided to be. Not in the way he looked at the man from her research cohort who talked to her for too long one afternoon outside the library. Not aggressively, not obviously, just with the flat, steady, entirely unambiguous expression of someone drawing a line, without moving a single muscle. He kissed her in a corridor on a Tuesday. She had been walking with Kezia, mid-sentence, when his hand appeared from somewhere and closed around her wrist, and he simply pulled, not roughly, just with the easy, complete certainty of someone who had decided something and was not asking permission for the decision. Kezia had continued walking for 2 full steps before registering that Amara was no longer beside her. He had her against the wall of the side corridor, one hand flat on the wall beside her head, and he looked at her for 1 second, dark eyes, close, entirely decided, and then he kissed her the way he did everything, without performance, without build-up, directly and completely, and with his whole attention. When he pulled back, Amara was not entirely certain of her own name. Kezia was standing at the entrance to the corridor with her coffee cup raised and her expression somewhere between scandalized and deeply satisfied. "I'm going to pretend I didn't see that," she said. "Please," Amara said. "I'm going to think about it for weeks," Kezia said and walked away. Day One watched her go with something on his face that was not quite a smile and was entirely too pleased with itself. Amara pushed his shoulder. He caught her hand and did not let go of it for the rest of the walk across campus. She was in his apartment more than she was in her dormitory room. This had happened gradually, And then all at once, the way things happened with him. One evening studying on his couch had become 2 evenings, had become the slow migration of her things into his space. A charger on his desk. A jacket on the back of his chair. Her reference books on the end of the long table that had quietly, without ceremony, become her end of the table. He never commented on it. He simply made room. She loved this about him. The way he made space for her without announcing that he was doing it. She would come in and find he had cleared a section of the bookshelf for her notebooks, or that the coffee in the kitchen was already the kind she preferred, or that there was a second blanket on the couch for when she fell asleep reading, which she did more often than she planned. Small, deliberate, unspoken things that said, "I was thinking about you before you arrived." He cooked for her sometimes. Not elaborate meals, just food, real food, made with the same contained efficiency he brought to everything. She would sit on the kitchen counter and watch him and think about the first time she had been in this kitchen, back before any of this had been decided, when she had laughed at something he said before she had any intention of laughing, and the surprise of it had changed the whole temperature of the room. He would look up from whatever he was doing and find her watching him, and he would not look away. He would look back, steady, warm, unguarded in the way he had only recently let himself be with her. It was its own kind of intimacy before anything else. The looking, the being looked at, the not needing to manage either. It was a Friday night in February. Cold outside, warm inside, the city doing what it always did beyond the window. They had been watching something neither of them was actually paying attention to, her feet across his lap, his hand resting on her ankle with the easy, unself-conscious quality of someone completely at home with what they were. At some point the television became irrelevant. He pulled her toward him, and she went willingly, the way she always went willingly now, without the filing and the management and the careful internal architecture she had built around herself for so long. She settled against him, and he tilted her face up and kissed her slowly, the kind of kiss that was not going anywhere fast and was also clearly going somewhere. She pulled back slightly. He stopped immediately. He always stopped immediately. That was something she had learned about him, that for all the boldness, all the certainty, all the easy possession in the way he moved toward her, the moment she stopped, he stopped. No question. No negotiation. Just stopped, and looked at her, and waited. "I haven't done this before," she said quietly. He looked at her. Really looked, with the full, unhurried attention that had undone her since the first time she experienced it across a common room table on an unremarkable afternoon. She watched him understand what she meant. Watched it land. Something changed in his face. Not surprise, not hesitation. Something slower. The slight soften of the jaw. The quality of his eyes shifting, becoming more deliberate, more careful. Something moving through his expression like a decision being made in real time. He reached up and tucked her hair back from her face slowly.
"We don't have to," he said.
"If you don't want to, I want to." She held his face in both hands, and he looked at her for a moment longer, making sure, checking without words, the way he checked everything important. And then he said, quietly and entirely without pressure, "I'll be gentle." Just that. Low and certain and completely unhurried. He kissed her again, slower than before, like he had all the time in the world and intended to use every bit of it. The television played to no one. The city hummed outside. The apartment stayed warm. And Amara stopped thinking entirely, which was, she realized, the first time in as long as she could remember that she had. The last months went too fast. That was the thing nobody told you about good things. They moved at a different speed than everything else. The hard months had been long and heavy and full of texture and weight. These months were warm and quick, and she was always slightly surprised when she looked at the calendar and found how much of them were already behind her. She stopped checking the graduate school portal obsessively. She did not remove Seoul from the list. She told him in May. Not the deadline, he knew the deadline. The scholarship end date had been a fact sitting quietly between them since before they were anything, at the edge of everything like a patient and inevitable reckoning. What she told him was what she had not said out loud yet. That she did not want to go. That leaving felt nothing like the leaving she had done from Accra the previous September. That leaving had been chosen and deliberate and full of the clean energy of someone moving toward something. This felt like the opposite of that. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without filling the space. "I know," he said when she finished. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "I just needed to say it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her into him and held her, and she felt the warmth of him and the particular solidity of being held by someone who did not hold things loosely. She closed her eyes and said nothing else. He did not make promises. She did not ask for any. They both understood what they were holding, and neither of them pretended it was simple. The last week was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. A coffee at the Northgate Cafe on Wednesday. His hand on the small of her back as they walked across campus in a way that still made Kezia visibly emotional every time she witnessed it. Her things coming back out of his apartment one by one. Charger, jacket, reference books, in the quiet and specific reverse of how they had arrived, each small object leaving a small absence behind it. Kezia cried properly, without apology. Her face doing the thing it did when she had decided that performing composure was not worth the effort. Amara held her for a long time. "You changed everything about this year for me," Amara said. "Obviously," Kezia said, still crying. "I'm extremely impactful." Amara laughed through her own tears and held her tighter and thought about how strange and good it was to have someone who showed up every time without being asked and without keeping score. Day one drove her. He carried her suitcase. One suitcase, the same one she had arrived with, the zipper catching halfway through the way it always had, the small familiar malfunction that had crossed an ocean with her. He lifted it into the boot of the car without comment, and they drove to Incheon in the early morning, mostly in silence, the city moving past the windows in the blue and gold of just after sunrise. At the departure's drop-off, he got out of the car and stood with her on the pavement, and the airport was already enormous and loud and indifferent around them. She looked at him, the set of his jaw, the steady, unguarded way he looked at her that she had spent so many months learning to read and was still learning. "Don't say it was good while it lasted," she said. "Don't say that." "I wasn't going to say that." "What were you going to say?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and held her face in both hands and kissed her, not urgently, not desperately, thoroughly, completely. The way he did everything, like he had decided what he wanted to say, and this was the most honest way to say it. When he pulled back, he pressed his forehead against hers. She breathed. "Go," he said. The same word, the same quiet, decided quality she had heard from him before. The word that was not an ending but a direction. She went. She did not look back. Not because she didn't want to, she wanted to very much, but because she understood now that not looking back was not the same as not caring. Sometimes it was simply the only way to keep moving. Sometimes you had to trust that the thing you were leaving knew what it was to you, and that not turning around was itself a kind of faith. The departure's hall swallowed her. The automatic doors closed. The city disappeared behind glass. She kept walking. Accra in June was loud and warm and entirely itself. That was the only way Amara had ever been able to describe home. Not comfortable, not always easy, not free of complication, but known. The specific known of a place that has been inside you longer than you have had language for it. The smell of it before the plane door opened. The quality of the heat, which was different from Seoul's summer heat, less surprised by itself, more settled. The heat of a city that had never tried to be anything other than what it was. She moved back into the family house in Zorwalu, her old room, her mother's cooking, the mango tree in the back garden that had finally, stubbornly, started producing fruit. She called her graduate school contacts. She confirmed her deferred spot at a firm in the city for the summer. She unpacked her one suitcase, the same one that had carried her to Seoul and back, zipper still catching halfway, the small, reliable malfunction that now felt like an old friend. She got on with the business of being a person in the place she had come from. She did not hear from him. A week passed. Then, too. She checked her phone the way you check a phone when you are pretending you are not checking it, briefly, casually, in the middle of doing something else, as if the checking were incidental rather than the point. She put it face down on the desk when she was working. She left it in the other room when she was eating. Neither strategy helped. She just missed him. Quietly, consistently, In the way you miss something that was genuinely good and that you had been lucky enough to have it all. Not the dramatic, disabling missing of something you lost unfairly. The steady, low-burning missing of something you chose to leave, which was in some ways harder because there was no one to be angry at and nowhere to direct the weight of it. She told herself it was fine. She told herself this was what the ending of a scholarship year looked like. She told herself he was finishing his thesis and she was starting her internship, and that two people in different cities in different countries with different demands on their attention was simply a fact, not a verdict. She told herself these things with the practiced discipline of a woman who had been managing the unmanageable since she was a teenager, and most of the time it worked well enough to get through the day. At night, it worked less well. At night she lay in her childhood bed in the dark and listened to the neighborhood dogs and the distant traffic and the occasional burst of music from somewhere down the road, and she thought about the rooftop of the North Building and the way Seoul had looked from up there, enormous and luminous, the Han River a dark ribbon between its bridges, and the specific warmth of his hand closing around hers, and the way he had said just stop like it was the simplest thing in the world, like she had been making everything complicated for no reason at all. She thought about the corridor and the kitchen counter and the Friday nights and the early mornings and the coffee at the Northgate Cafe, and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, which she always was. She was always watching. She had been watching him since a common room table on an ordinary September afternoon, and she had never once stopped. She got up. She went to her desk. She worked. This was still how she managed. It had always been how she managed. Through the work. Through the structure. Through the filling of every available hour until the feeling found nowhere left to sit except quietly, in the background, where she could carry it without it carrying her. Her mother noticed on the third week.
Of course she did.
Her mother noticed everything, had always noticed everything, with the quiet, comprehensive attention of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and learned early that the things children did not say were often the most important things to hear. She did not push. She appeared in the doorway of Amara's room one evening with 2 cups of tea, and set one on the desk without comment, and sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at her daughter with a patient, open expression that had always meant, "I am here. You do not have to explain."
But you can.
Amara looked at her tea for a moment.
There was someone, she said.
"I know," her mother said. "You don't know anything. I didn't tell you. You didn't have to." Her mother wrapped both hands around her cup. "You came home different. Not worse. Just different. Rearrange." A pause. "Someone rearranges you. That's not nothing." Amara looked at the ceiling. "It's complicated. Love always is," her mother said.
Simply.
Without drama. The way she said things that were simply true and did not require embroidery. "I didn't say love." Her mother said nothing. She drank her tea. Outside, the neighborhood dog started barking at something and then stopped. The mango tree moved slightly in the evening wind. "He's in Seoul," Amara said. "And you're here. And I'm here." Her mother looked at her for a long moment.
"Amara.
You have spent your entire life building towards something, working towards something, planning towards something." She set her cup down. "You are extraordinarily good at all of that. But you have never been very good at letting something come to you without planning it first." Amara looked at her. "I'm not telling you what to do," her mother said. "I'm telling you what I see." She stood. She picked up her cup. The mango tree didn't plan to fruit. It just finally stopped refusing to. She left. Amara sat at her desk for a long time after that, in the warm Accra evening, with the tea going cold beside her and the sound of the neighborhood settling into night. She thought about the Seoul application sitting in her drafts folder. The one she had written 3 times and not submitted. The one she had added at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and not removed. She opened her laptop. She read the statement of purpose she had written the 3rd time, the most recent version, the one written in December when she had been tired and honest and not in the mood to perform anything. She read it twice. Then she submitted it. Quickly, before she could organize herself out of it. The confirmation email arrived in 4 minutes. She closed her laptop. She felt something she could not immediately name. Not relief, not certainty, not the clean resolution of a decision made and done. Something quieter than that. The The feeling of having stopped refusing something that had been waiting for her to stop. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in 3 weeks. The internship kept her busy through July in the way that good work keeps you busy, not as an escape, but as an engagement, the satisfying occupation of a mind that is genuinely interested in what it is doing. She was working on a mixed-use development project in cantonments, the kind of work that required everything she had learned in Seoul, and something she was learning for the first time, and she threw herself into it with the focused attention that had always been her most reliable quality. She called Kezia every Sunday. Kezia was back in Accra too, finishing her fellowship write-up, loudly opinionated about everything, and unfailingly good company. "Have you heard from him?" Kezia asked one Sunday, with the casual, undeceived directness of someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to ask.
No.
"Have you contacted him?" A pause.
No.
Amara. "I know. You submitted the Seoul application." "How do you know that?" "Because I know you," Kezia said. "And because you would not have done that if you were actually letting go. You submitted it, and then you sat in Accra waiting for the universe to do the rest of the work." Amara said nothing. "Contact the man," Kezia said, not unkindly. "You are not a passive person in any other area of your life. Stop being one in this one." She thought about it for 3 more days. She drafted a message 6 times in 6 different registers: casual, direct, careful, warm, brief, long, and deleted all of them because none of them were right, because none of them were the things she actually wanted to say, which was, "I submitted the Seoul application, and I don't know what that means yet, but I think you should know." She did not send any of them. What she sent instead, on a Thursday evening in the last week of July, was nothing. Because she was still at her office desk at 8:30 when her phone lit up, and the name on the screen was not one she had been expecting to see, and she stared at it for a moment before she answered. "Daewon." "Where are you?" he said. Not hello. Just that, "Where are you?" low and direct, the way he asked everything, as if the social architecture around questions were optional. She looked at her desk, at the drawings spread across it, the site plans, the elevation studies. "Still at the office," she said. "When do you finish?" "I'm finishing now," she said, which had not been true 30 seconds ago, and was completely true now. She was already stacking her drawings. "Why?" "Come outside when you're done," he said. She stopped stacking. "What?" "Come outside," he said again. The same patient, unhurried tone. As if he were asking her to step into a corridor, not to step out of a building in Accra to find. She did not let herself finish the thought. She did not let herself believe it yet, because believing it before it was confirmed was the kind of thing that could undo a person. "Daewon." "I know," he said. Just that. The same 2 words she had said to him in the research lab in December, in the dark corridor in November, in every moment between them that had been too large for more specific language. "I know." She gathered her things. She walked to the lift. She went down 7 floors and through the lobby and pushed through the glass door into the warm Accra night, and the street outside was lit amber from the road lights and busy with evening traffic and food vendors and the general, indifferent motion of a city that had somewhere to be. And he was there, leaning against a car parked just beyond the entrance, hands in his pockets, completely still, looking at the door the way he had always looked at things he was waiting for, with the particular, unhurried certainty of someone who had made a decision and was prepared to wait as long as the decision required. He was wearing a plain dark jacket. He looked like himself, exactly like himself, which was the thing that made everything else irrelevant. Not the distance, not the months, not the silence. Just him, on a pavement in Accra, looking at her. She stopped walking. He saw her. He did not move. He did not call out. He simply stood there, in the amber light and the warm evening, with the absolute stillness of someone who had crossed an ocean and was not in a hurry now that he had arrived. Her bag slipped off her shoulder. She walked toward him. Not carefully, not composed, not with any of the management or architecture or deliberate construction she brought to things that mattered. She just walked, and then she was running, across the pavement in her work clothes with her bag bumping against her hip, and he pushed off the car and came toward her and caught her the way he caught things, firmly, completely, without fuss. She pressed her face into his shoulder. His arms came around her and tightened, and she could feel him breathe, and the street was loud around them, and the evening was warm, and none of it was the right setting for this, and all of it was perfect. After a moment he pulled back just enough to look at her. She looked up at him. The jaw, the eyes, all of it, right here on a pavement in Accra on a Thursday evening in July, like it was the most natural place in the world for him to be. "You didn't call," she said. "Calling seemed insufficient," he said. She stared at him. "You flew to Accra?" "Yes." "Without telling me." "I didn't want you to tell me not to come." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite something else. "I wouldn't have told you not to come." "I know that now," he said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Now I know." She shook her head slowly. He watched her do it with the expression she had finally stopped trying to manage her response to, warm and steady, and entirely decided and entirely, unreservedly hers. "You are so efficient," he said. She laughed then, the full, surprised, completely undone laugh that had always arrived before she could decide about it. The laugh she had laughed in his kitchen on an October night before any of this had been decided, and his face did the thing it did when she laughed. Opened, warmed, the compass needle swinging to true north without his asking it to. He kissed her right there on the pavement. Not urgently, not desperately. The way he did everything, with full attention completely, as if he had decided exactly what he wanted, and this was the most direct way to it. She kissed him back. Behind them, a car horn sounded for entirely unrelated reasons, and the street continued to be itself, and neither of them particularly cared. They sat on the low wall outside the building after, not ready to go anywhere yet. Her shoulder against his arm around her. The city cooling slightly as the evening deepened, settling into the particular warmth of an Accra night that was always less hot than the day, but never quite cool. She had 100 questions. She asked the one that mattered most first. "J1, she said. He nodded slowly. He had been expecting it. "I told him before I booked the flight." She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the street, at the traffic moving past, at the ordinary business of a Thursday evening in a city that did not know or care what was happening on this wall. He said. Day1 paused. Took a breath. Set the words in order the way he always set things in order before he gave them. He said she deserves to be happy. Make sure she is. He looked at the street. Those were the exact words. Amara sat with that for a moment. The full weight of it. The generosity it took to say that. The particular grace of a man who had loved her carefully and honestly and was choosing, against everything it cost him, to mean it. She felt something in her chest shift, the specific and complicated feeling of being loved well by more than one person in ways that did not cancel each other out but simply existed alongside each other, each one true, each one real, each one costing something and giving something in return. He's going to be okay, she said. He's already okay. Day1's jaw moved slightly. He met someone. End of last semester. Someone from his urban policy research group. The corner of his mouth shifted. He didn't say much about her, but he seemed like himself. The good version. Amara exhaled. Something she had been carrying without fully knowing she was carrying it released. Quiet and complete, like a breath she had been holding since December, since the bench by the fountain, since the last time she had watched J1 walk away across the campus and wondered whether she had broken something in him that would not find its way back. It had found its way back. Good, she said. That's really good. Day1 looked at her. You were always going to worry about him. Of course I was. I know. He said it simply, without weight, without resentment. Just the plain acknowledgement of someone who understood her completely and had decided that was not a problem, that it was, in fact, one of the things. One of the things what? She asked. He looked at her with the directness that had undone her in a common room on an ordinary September afternoon a lifetime ago. One of the things he told me about you, he said. That I came here for. She stared at him. He talked about you? He said. Day1 stopped. Looked at the street. Looked back at her. He said you were the kind of person who worries about the people she's hurt more than she worries about herself. And that whoever ended up with you needed to be the kind of person who would not let her make herself smaller on their behalf. A pause. He said some other things. But that was the one. Amara looked at her hands. She thought about Shin Jae-won, the steady coffees and the careful silences, and the way he had loved her without conditions and let her go without cruelty and spoken well of her to the person she had chosen instead. She thought about what it cost to be that generous. She thought about what kind of man did that and what kind of love produced it, and she felt the grief of losing it and the gratitude for having had it exist in her chest at the same time, the way she was learning they always would.
He didn't have to do that, she said.
No, Daewon said. He didn't. They sat quietly for a moment. The street moved. Somewhere down the road, music started up, something with a heavy bass, someone's Friday beginning early. The mango seller on the corner was packing up for the night, stacking crates with the rhythmic efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. I submitted the Seoul application, she said. He turned to look at her. Last month. I've been working on it since December, and I kept not submitting it, and then one evening I just did. She looked at her hands. I don't know what that means, yet in terms of. It means you're coming back, he said. She looked at him. You don't know that. I know you. He said it without arrogance. Just the simple, grounded confidence of someone who had been paying very close attention for a very long time. You don't write 3 drafts of something you're not going to do. You don't add something to a list at 11 o'clock at night and leave it there for 7 months if it doesn't mean something. He held her gaze. You're coming back. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the list. She thought about the 3 drafts. She thought about 11 o'clock on a Tuesday in December, tired and honest, and not in the mood to pretend, clicking add, and then not clicking remove, not once, across 7 months and 2 seasons and an ocean, and everything that had happened on both sides of it. I might be coming back, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. You're coming back. She pushed his arm. He caught her hand and held it, the same easy, certain grip, the one that felt like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for both of them to stop getting in the way of it. You flew to Accra, she said again, quietly this time. Not accusation. Just the particular wonder of it sitting in her voice. You had a whole ocean between us, he said. I wasn't going to wait and see if you swam. She laughed again, softer this time, the surprised kind, the undone kind. He watched her laugh and did not look away, and she watched him watch her, and somewhere in the watching and the being watched and the warm Accra evening and the amber streetlight and the city going about its unremarkable Thursday business all around them, something finished. Something that had been in the process of becoming for a very long time arrived, finally and completely, at what it had always been trying to be. Not in Seoul, not on a rooftop or in a corridor, or at a bench by a fountain. Here, on a low wall outside an office building in Accra on a Thursday evening in July, with the mango seller packing up and the music starting down the road, and the mango tree in the back garden of her mother's house finally, stubbornly, producing fruit. Her city, his decision, their beginning. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his chin lightly against the top of her head. The city moved. The evening settled. And neither of them said anything else for a long time because some things did not require language, because some arrivals were complete in themselves, because after a very long journey, the thing you needed most was simply to stop moving and feel that you were there. She had left Seoul with 1 suitcase and a promise to herself that she was choosing herself, that the discomfort of not knowing was worth more than the comfort of staying where it was safe. She had done that. She had sat in the not knowing across an entire ocean and not flinched from it, and not filled it with noise. And he had crossed that ocean. That was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story. If this story lived in your chest the way we hoped it would, if you felt the rooftop and the stairwell and the corridor and this pavement in Accra, then you already know what to do. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs a good love story. Subscribe to Romance HeartFlixTV so you never miss what we put out next. And leave us a comment. What was the moment that got you? The corridor kiss? The airport goodbye? Him showing up in Accra without calling? We read every single comment, every time. Thank you for being here from part 1 all the way to the end. You are the reason we tell these stories.
See you next time.